Hello again, Robin Goldsmith here with Proactive Testing Reusable Test Designs. And now we're going to get into test design specifications. We're going to look at what they look like. Okay? So once again, if you have questions, ask them with the question or comment box. And what our topics are, we're going to be looking at informal test design specifications and formal test design specifications. Then we're also going to be looking at the test design specifications that are generally reusable as opposed to those that are specific to an application or a feature. Okay? And our exercise is making a test design reusable. So we are here. We are getting to the test design specification that is what we need to demonstrate to be confident that a feature, function, or capability works. Okay? So if we look at all of these conditions, okay, for entering a state abbreviation, displaying the state name, we've got all of these conditions. We've got things that need to be valid or that are valid tests or tests of a valid exercise, tests that are of invalid conditions. Okay? Those are all things that need to be demonstrated to be confident that the state abbreviation lookup works. That is a test design specification, an informal test design specification. Why do we say it's informal? Okay. Well, because it's not neatly typed. Well, it is sort of neatly typed, but it's not super readable. This is an example of a formal test design specification in the format that the IEEE Standard 829 suggests. So we start with an identifier. In other words, what is this? This is the test design specification for adding a new customer to the database. By the way, this numbering over here simply, it's not necessary, but it helps if you're trying to use some kind of an indexing scheme. Adding a new customer to a database, in case you don't remember, was one of the conditions that we identified in our functionality matrix. Okay? And the formal test design specification identifies the set of features taken together that have to be demonstrated to have confidence that the function works properly. So what we're saying is that if these 9 conditions all work, that would give us confidence that we can add a new customer to the database. Formal test design specification also includes the opportunity to refine your approach. Information about carrying out the tests. This is not essential, but it's often valuable. And then the big thing that differentiates the formal test design specification is that it identifies the set of test cases that taken together will give us confidence that these features to be tested have been demonstrated. So we're demonstrating 2 things. We're test cases that demonstrate that these things have been demonstrated, and when they in turn have been demonstrated, that gives us confidence that the test design specification has been satisfied. So let's compare formal and informal test design specifications. The formal test design specification is clearer. It's written in a more clear manner, full sentences, and so forth. It does explicitly identify the set of test cases that taken together will demonstrate that it works, and it explicitly offers the opportunity to include refinements of the testing approach. Weaknesses, it's going to take longer to write. It can get cumbersome. Okay? And for some people, that's a deal breaker. So the formal test design specifications have strengths and weaknesses. Okay? Similarly, informal test design specifications have strengths. They're quicker to create. Okay? Possibly you can identify more test conditions. That's not an unusual thing if you're not writing so much for each test condition. Although I don't think that you can say for certain that an informal test design specification would have more conditions than a formal one. But it sometimes occurs that way. What are the weaknesses of an informal test design specification? Well, it could be less clear. It's more concise. You may have to infer what the test cases are, although I'll tell you in our state abbreviation lookup, I think that inference is pretty straightforward. And the informal test design specification doesn't specifically remind you to make approach refinements, but you could. So, which should you use? Should you use formal or informal? Well, what's the simple answer? Where do you think formal test design specifications come from? They usually start as informal test design specifications. And then as somebody needs to make them clearer, easier to understand, easier to communicate, what happens? They become formalized, they get cleaned up, the wording gets improved. So, people tend to use both. Okay? They start with the informal test design specifications, they turn them into formal test design specifications as the added work seems warranted. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. So let's look at that informal test design specification for the state abbreviation lookup. We've spent quite a bit of time designing a test for that state abbreviation lookup. 2-character abbreviation. Okay? That seems like a lot of time for a 2-character state abbreviation lookup. Yeah. The question is, does that lookup, is it only limited to looking up state abbreviations? Okay? Or does that test design specification actually apply to any other lookups? Well, of course. It applies to lookups, any lookup from a finite table. And in that test design specification, specific to the state abbreviations, in fact, what we're going to see is that some of those conditions may be specific to the state abbreviation lookup. Most of them are generally reusable that would pertain to any lookup. Okay? And so we can do two things. One thing is that with a little rewording, we can remove the specificity. That is, with a little rewording, and we'll see this in a second, we can make every one of those conditions in the state abbreviation lookup pertain to any lookup from a finite table. So one of the places that we had this, okay, instead of it being a state abbreviation lookup, is we're just entering any lookup. And we're going to display back the looked up value rather than the state name. Okay? The 2-character valid input needs to be reworded slightly. So we should have a valid input of the required input length. So if the state abbreviation length is 2 characters, the required input length is 2 characters. If the key is 5 digits, okay, the required input length is 5 digits, and so forth. Similarly, on the invalids, okay, we should not accept an invalid value that is of the required input length. Okay? Similarly, a one-character field, okay, we can revise that wording to make it generally reusable. It's too short. And the 3 characters and 3,000 characters, okay, we should change that to too long and much too long. Okay? So with this rewording, I think you will see that we have now got, I believe, okay, we have now got a test design specification that is reusable for looking up any value from a finite table. Okay. Similarly, adding a new customer to the database. Did this test design specification pertain only to adding new customers to a database? Well, I don't think so. I don't think it has to be just customers that are added to the database. And so things that are application or feature specific, I'm going to highlight in the pink here. And we're going to reword in green to make it more generally reusable. So we could add a new record to a database rather than adding a new customer to a database. I hope this is understandable. Similarly, on the features to be tested, requires entry of all required data fields and does not require other data entry. Is that application specific or generally reusable? It's generally reusable. Confirms the telephone number is a valid format for a valid area code. What about that? Well, that's application specific, isn't it? Now, to be fair, anybody who has to have a telephone number, we want to make sure it's a valid format and probably a valid area code. Similarly, confirms that the address includes a valid state abbreviation and zip code. Okay? Once again, not every record that's being added to a database has to have an address. Okay? But for records that do describe people's names and addresses and so forth, okay, we need to make sure that the address is valid, okay, that the state abbreviation and zip code are valid. Okay? We want to, the customer ID stuff, this is absolutely specific to adding the customer to the database, and it's absolutely specific to this particular application because some other customer database might not have a key with the same type of rules. Okay. But in fact, we can change that because the customer ID is a unique primary key, or a primary key that needs to be unique. And what this is really saying is that the primary key is unique and is defined in a manner that doesn't have gaps. Okay? Because gaps, when you have a way to check for gaps, that's a way to tell for sure whether or not you're missing anything. Allows exit without completing entry of customer information. Well, it's actually allowing exit without completing entry of any information of the information. Detects and does not allow a credit card number already listed for another customer. Well, what's that really about? Okay? Saying it's detecting an alternate key that is supposed to be unique, which is not unique. Okay? That's what that's really referring to. So I think you can see that as we've adjusted these, that we've got some that are probably not part of a generally reusable test design for adding a new record to a database. And then we've reworded some to make them generally reusable, and some of these entries were already reusable. We've got a couple more in this test design. Detects and does not allow adding a customer who is already on the database with the same name, address, and birth date. Well, that's specific to customers. Okay? And we can also say that it detects and does not allow adding a record with a key which allows duplicates, but for which there are differentiators of uniqueness that are not part of the key, that are not unique. So, if the differentiators are in the key, that's one thing. If the differentiators are not in the key, like birth date and so forth, okay, then they need to be identified so that those rules can be applied. Navigate seamlessly upon completion of the add to the next part of the transaction. Detects database errors which prevent properly adding a customer to the database. And once again, that's properly adding the record to the database. So I think you can see what we've done. We've taken this formal test design specification, same idea as with the informal. We've taken the things that were application specific. Some of those we were able to reword to make generally reusable, and some of those need to be pulled off into a separate application or feature specific test design specification. And the remaining ones can be in a reusable test design specification. So the application or feature-specific test design specification might look like this. It's adding the new customer to the database. It's confirming the telephone number is a valid format for a valid area code. It's confirming the address includes a valid state abbreviation. It assigns the customer ID with the next sequential tiebreaker, leaves no gaps, detects and does not allow adding a customer who is already on the database with the same name, address, and birth date. Okay? So we've got an application or feature-specific test design. We've got a more generally reusable test design for adding a new record to a database. So let's recap the sequence of events, the method that we used for creating reusable test designs. First of all, we start by brainstorming and using checklists and guidelines to supplement our brainstorming, to expand, to fill out that test design specification so that it more fully identifies the set of conditions that need to be demonstrated to give us confidence that it works. Then we evaluated that and we took the conditions that were generally reusable, and we changed wording where possible to make it generally reusable. And that was one test design specification. And any of those conditions that didn't fit that went into a second test design specification, which was feature or application specific. Okay? The conditions that apply only to this type of a condition. And then, when we are testing something specific to that feature or application, we apply both. We apply the application or feature-specific test design specification for those things that are just specific to it, and also the generally reusable test design specification for those things that apply across to other similar features, functions, or capabilities. When we are testing a different feature, function, or capability that is of a similar type, a lookup, for instance, from a finite table, then we use our generally reusable test design specification to tell us what it is we need to demonstrate to be confident it works. Okay? So, do you have questions? Is this understandable? Can you see how this works? Can you see the value of identifying test design specifications? Okay, what's the value of having in one place, convenient manner, a very thorough set of conditions, okay, that need to be demonstrated to give us confidence that something works? What's the value of having that when we need to test something similar? Okay. Does it make our testing more thorough? Does it make our testing more effective? Is there anything about this that is unclear? One of the issues that we always encounter is that once people get to this point in the course, now these things start looking so obvious and so simple that they tend to become complacent. So we have to be very careful about that. So if you have questions, if anything is not clear, you need to get to me with the questions in the comment box. Okay, I will try and get back to you so that you are understanding these concepts and techniques, so you can use them to your advantage. Once again, we don't have an exercise for you to do at the end of this session, but I would encourage you to step back and rethink about everything that we've covered. Make sure that things are clear to you, and if they are not, ask. That's the purpose of the question and comment box. So, thanks for joining us on this. We'll be starting up the next session. We'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.